Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forzia. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way of saying carpe diem, seize the day, seize the opportunity. And this year, an opportunity I really wanted to seize was watching Halt and Catch Fire again and actually talking about it with other people, which is a bit of a novelty for me. And so we're up leveling that now. And I'm getting a chance to talk with people who actually worked on the show, which is so exciting to do these interviews. Now, before we get into it, before I introduce my guest for today, I just wanted to give this quick note. If you haven't watched the show all the way through, this is going to be a spoiler heavy conversation, as with any of the interviews I'm doing about this show. If you're new to the show, go ahead and watch the episode recaps. Those are safe for you, those are spoiler free. But these interviews are spoiler filled. Okay, please just know that we're taking no prisoners today. So, having said that, I'm so excited to introduce my guest, who is Robert Komatsu, who is an editor for 13 episodes of Halt and Catch Fire across all 4 seasons of the show. So, welcome, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Melissa.
So excited to have you. And, for everybody listening in, I just want you to know, look, I don't know a lot about editing, but that's why this conversation is actually so important, because we need to bring this perspective into how we watch the show. And I'm certainly not going to be able to give it to you in the recaps that I'm doing unless I talk to Robert. So this is going to be a really fun conversation. Very excited to dig into some of the big picture, but also some of the technical details of what you
Sure.
worked on, Robert.
Okay.
So first, let's start just general. I mean, how did you get connected to the show? How did you start working with Halt and Catch Fire?
It was a really sort of roundabout way of getting there. I come from features, and at the time, before Halt, I had only cut like one television show, and that was season one of American Horror Story. And so I was meeting for different TV shows to try to get my second show. Had a meeting for a TV show that was a fantastic meeting. Like the creative the creator slash showrunner and exec producer and the post producer like all really liked me, and they called the next day and said like, we want to hire Rob, but we just have to wait for the producing director to get back into town so he can sort of sign off as well. Well, he came back into town and did not sign off on me. I think he felt that because the creator and exec producer, it was their first show in those positions, they needed like an editor who was like, a 10-year veteran of television or something. So I didn't get it. But the post producer called me about 2 months later because the person that they hired, they fired. And they said, now are you available? And I said, I'm not, unfortunately, because I was working with Chris Carter, who does the X-Files. And she said, well, I have another show in a few months or so that I'm going on to, and do you want to meet on that? I said, sure. So I met on that show. So this is the third show, I guess, or the next show. And that was a good meeting. But the most interesting thing about the meeting was that an exec producer from the show also came, and that was Melissa Bernstein, who was the exec producer also on Halt and Catch Fire. And the next day, she called my agent and said, like, I actually want Rob to meet on Halt because I think he would be a good fit there. So I did. And so I met with Jonathan Lisco, who was the showrunner of season one. And I think that was a Friday. And then Monday, I got hired and I started. So
Really takes a village, doesn't it?
I know, right? It was probably like the weirdest sort of, twists and turns for me ever getting something. But that's how it happened.
But I think that's a real lesson to all of us of take the meeting, just have the conversations, because maybe it's a no today, but it'll be yes tomorrow or a yes for
Yeah.
something else. It's so
Yeah.
interesting how like you can draw all the lines, but you never would have predicted it up front.
Right, totally. Yeah. So that's
Oh
kind of
gosh.
the crazy way it happened.
Oh my gosh. Well, so first of all, so you had done more film at that point?
Yeah, I sort of came up with well, I mean, I did 5 features, 3 as the first assistant and 2 as the additional editor on Ron Howard movies.
Mm.
But like the very beginning of my career, I was a second assistant with Michael Kahn, who was Steven Spielberg's editor. So I kind of like was always in like the feature world. And then when I became an editor myself full time, yeah, it was basically features. It was really hard to actually get into television.
Yeah. So I do want to ask about your process, obviously, for editing Halt and Catch Fire, but what is the difference? Was there any major difference that you spotted between editing for film versus TV?
There's no difference. That's the thing. Well, I get, back then when I first started TV, I think there was a little bit more of a difference than there is now. But like now it seems like there's so many feature directors doing television. In fact, like when I worked with these directors, Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck on Mrs. America, and our producer was Stacey Scher, who's like Quentin Tarantino and Soderbergh's producer, we treated that like a feature. So like we did that more like a feature schedule. But like sort of like the traditional 1 hour drama schedule is faster than features. And I think that's why, producers or studio execs are like, were afraid, like, oh, you come from features, you're too slow, you're not gonna be able to handle the television schedule. But that's really it, in for a 1 hour drama, the way it works is that you have your shooting days. In our case, with our budget and our size of our show, we had 8 shooting days. And then the editor has 4 additional days to finish their cut. You show that to the director, and then you work with the director for 4 days. And then you show it, in our case, to Jonathan and the Chris's. And they would have maybe like a week, sort of dependent because like they split their time between the writer's room and the cutting room. So like, sometimes if they're still writing, it took a little longer for them to get down to us. And then we would turn it into Mark Johnson and Melissa Bernstein, our exec producers, if they had any comments or notes. Then finally, we would turn to AMC for their notes. So it is kind of a fast schedule for most traditional like 1 hour dramas. Um, but that's how it worked with us, and it was like smooth. It was no big deal. But other than that, I mean, like you're still telling stories, right? It's like, what's the real difference?
Absolutely. And you said a little bit about your process there, but so you have 4 days that are really concentrated days for you to work on like all of the footage that you've gotten to that point. What kind of process, and maybe you were working on it a little bit
Yeah,
during the shooting as well.
yeah, so what the way it works is that when they're shooting day two, you're cutting day one.
Yeah.
And the goal, at least for me, is like basically to be up to camera. So like when the day after they finish shooting, I'm getting the last day's footage and I want to be done cutting it by that day. So then I have like the rest of the time is just like refining it more or like putting all the scenes together and seeing how it flows. And like, now that I have the whole episode together, I might want to like change the pacing here or whatever. I usually tend to add sound effects and music as I go. I know a
Mm.
lot of editors won't do that and they'll put it all together and then find out where they want the score to be. I tend to do it like as I go and then like adjust. And I might think like, oh, I had a cue that was in this scene, but now that I have like these 5 scenes together, it actually should be one long cue that goes across like 5 different scenes. It's
So
just
it
like,
gives you that big picture as you're
yeah,
going along. Yeah.
yeah. I just tend to do it as I go along too, just because then I'm kind of like, if worst case scenario, I'm done and I won't run out of time because like I kind of was doing it as I go along.
It takes a bit of the pressure off, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who do you work? I'm getting a sense of it, but who do you work with the most as you're editing? What departments or what jobs, what other roles are you working with?
On TV or on features?
On TV, and
On
let's say
TV,
specifically on Halt and Catch Fire
on
in case
Halt.
that's difference.
Sure. Yeah, on Halt, it would be the showrunners. So like yeah, like the directors, like I was saying, they get 4 days in the cutting room, and then traditionally they're sort of like bye. Um, since I come from features and like it's a very director centric world, I would always keep my directors in the loop. So like I would like write to them, so like hey, like for example, like Daisy or Karen, or Phil Abraham or Juan. And I would say like, hey, so like, these are the changes that we're making. Just want to keep you like, in the loop of what's going on. But for the most part, after the director's cut days, they're gone, and then it's just me working with the Chris's or with Jonathan and the Chris's.
Mhm. So, when you're working in TV, obviously new directors are coming in for most of the episodes that you're doing. There may be some shifting in who you're working with from season to season. What are some of the things that you would do to establish a working relationship quickly enough to get into it? Or, is that even a factor for you?
Well, like I always it depends. Like there's some directors that well, I always do this. I mean, not every editor does this. I like to always talk to the directors before we start shooting. Um, some some directors I'll send scenes as we go. I definitely do that with like Anna and Ryan when I work with them, not on Halt, but like this is what you do with features too. So that's why I'm always used to it. Daisy, for example, would call me usually once a day from set, not really to talk about. It was more just like she was downloading information as she shot and just like her thought process of the day, or just sort of like decompressing. So we just sort of talk about stuff. But so that's sort of like the process that I have with all these directors.
So that's interesting with Daisy. So she would potentially be like highlighting for you things that felt like they worked or didn't work, or
Yeah, I think so. Also just I think it was just like a a break from the set. It's like time to call Rob. So like, she would call every day for sure.
that's good to be the person on the other end of the phone when you're a trusted member of the team.
Yeah, no, yeah, totally. Yeah.
So obviously one major difference between film and TV is film, you've got the whole script, you know where it's headed.
Hmm.
Maybe things shift a little bit on some films as it's going, but for the most part it probably stays pretty faithful. Whereas with TV, like you don't necessarily know exactly the whole picture. I'm curious,
Hmm.
how far ahead did you know what you were trying to do? How did that factor into your edit?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question because, it's I think by the time you're cutting the episodes, hopefully you know where the story's going to go, but not always. Like there are some seasons where you might get like the outlines for like the next episodes because they're not done writing them yet. And for sure, you're most not gonna have the full picture when you're signing on to a season. So a lot of it's based on faith of like, I like the first three scripts I've read, and I trust the people behind, the scenes that they're going to like, finish the story correctly or like or to satisfactory to what I want. But yeah, a lot of it is based on faith. I was lucky on Halt in season three. I asked the Chris's and Melissa, like, do you mind if I hang out in the writer's room before we start the show? And they're like, yeah, please. So like that was fun because like I got to see that. I've never experienced that process before of being in the writer's room. So that was fun to watch them how they run the room and how they get the writers involved. And it also gave me some insight to like what was going to be happening.
I'm curious, because it's being written as it's happening. Were there ever times where you edited something and sort of made a prediction about, or made a bold choice about what how it was going to play out in that one particular episode, and then either in the future found it really headed in a different direction, or conversely, like was there ever a time that you found it was like perfect, like you had predicted it? Does either of those sort of ring a bell to you as something that might have played into that?
It's always perfect. What are you talking about? So, no, I mean, for sure, like, I, I think usually you get an idea of where it's going. So, like, you can kind of predict it. But there have been cases where you might think, like, oh, I didn't realize we're going to emphasize this that much in the future. And hopefully you're on the kind of show where you can go back and like revise it before it's sort of like or you can unlock the episode. It's not like you're up against air dates, or like now with streaming, especially like you do tend to have more time, or like you might deliver everything before they start releasing them, which gives you more opportunities to do that sort of thing.
It's interesting because with Halt in particular, it just seems like there were things that they set up in season one that paid off in season four. And who knew they had that much runway, And so it's like when you see these little details, like I think in particular, because I know we'll talk a bit later about like spoiler alert for those of you who have not already listened to
Mhm.
my warning. For Gordon's death in season 4, they're
Oh,
teasing it
he
in
dies.
every season,
Yeah.
every single season. There's I had a conversation with Morgan Hinkelman and Alana Kavanaugh
Hmm.
recently, and we talked a little bit about the scene where Alana, Donna sings her to sleep and is singing the song that is used in Gordon's death scene.
Baby Mine from Dumbo.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
it's like, it just feels like a show where how far ahead can you really look as an editor? And then for things to come together, what feels like very perfectly for somebody like me, obviously whatever tools you were using to predict were working.
We used AI. No, just kidding. One thing I don't know if like this was a subtle thing though. In episode 401, the long extended teaser, on one shot we have Gordon dialing. I think he's trying to dial Cameron, so he's pushing the buttons on the phone. The tones that we use for each button is Baby Mine from Dumbo. So it's like do 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 do. So
What a cool detail. And
yeah,
again, that's what, 6 episodes before
before the action.
407 is
Yeah,
where that pays off. So it's just
yeah.
it's just amazing to me. I mean, what a tall order it looks like when you watch the whole series to know that you were just, flying by the seat of your pants, seeing how it came together. But it seems to work very well to me.
Yeah, and I think the Chris's had like an overall arc of everything, but yeah, it's like, but you don't have every detail worked out. You're breaking each episode as you're going along in the season and then writing it, and so for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the specific episodes that you worked on. One of them that we wanted to talk about was from season 1, is episode 9,
Mhm.
Apelio. It was where the whole gang goes to Comdex. I love the Comdex episodes so much. It's such a
Yeah.
different feel to the show, but it feels like it's like a set piece, but it's beautifully integrated to the rest of the show. But I know you did a lot of work on that episode. So I know one of the really interesting montages that we see is with the the setup of the booth. It's sort of a montage between Cameron setting up the booth and Joe is setting up the hotel room, getting ready to receive people.
Yeah.
And there was, a song set to that. And, tell us a bit about what you worked on there and how that came together.
Yeah, well, I sort of broke the rules probably. Like, I mean, remember, I was new to television. But, I want to shout out to Thomas Golubik, who is our music supervisor. First of all, Thomas is amazing. One thing that Thomas does that I've never had with a music supervisor before and not since, the music super will often give you a bunch of choices for like the movie or the season, saying like, here's a bunch of great songs that would be great in the show, use them as you see fit. And if you have a request like, hey, I need something specific for this scene, they'll have great ideas for it. But Thomas also, and I don't think he did this every season, like I think he did it at least in season 4, maybe 3 and 4. He started making a document of each character and where the character was and what they would be listening to in terms of like how it reflected their character arc for the season. And I thought that was amazing. Like I've never seen someone put so much care into the thought of the music and how it relates to each individual character. Um, that being said, so I'm doing Up Heli Ah, and it's kind of internally listed as like the music episode because we're going to Comdex. They're going to have a party in their hotel room, and there's going to be a lot of songs. So like they increased the music budget for that episode. But I still broke the rules, and I added 2 very expensive songs on my own. One was in that montage. So like I was cutting together that montage of Cameron building the display for the giant downstairs with Joe upstairs. And for whatever reason, I just kept hearing the Violent Femmes Blister in the Sun playing in my head. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. Like, I don't know if it'll make it to like the final, but like I at least want to have it for now. And I put it in. And the way my cutting room was that season, I had my door here, and my monitor was the big monitor was facing me, but from the outside you saw the back of the monitor, so you couldn't see what I was working on, but you could hear what I was working on. And I remember I was playing the scene, and Jonathan Lisco walked by, and he said, like, I don't know what scene you're working on in there, but we're keeping that song. So like, and it turned out like he and the Chris's loved the song. And then in fact, there was another scene. When they arrived to Las Vegas, I also put another song. I put the Talking Heads Psycho Killer in there. So like I'm putting in two very expensive songs in addition to all the songs that are sort of like budgeted for this extra big music episode. But what was amazing is that Thomas heard it too, and he felt that the way that the songs were used in these two scenes were so like effective, like he worked his magic. He like happily worked his magic, and he got us those songs. And I don't know what he did. I'm sure it was like a lot of finagling, but he got it for us. So anyway.
I love that because it really gives me a sense that good ideas could come from anywhere
Hmm.
on that set, and that
Hmm.
people would run with it if it was something that seemed to serve the show.
Yeah, totally.
It's interesting because, especially knowing that Thomas had a document for each character, because I always feel the montages must have been difficult to come up with what song would be there, because every character felt like they had a very different sound.
Hmm.
The music behind them was very specific styles for each person. So then which is great when you
Hmm.
have a scene with just that one person, or, a main person. But when you're trying to match Cameron and Joe, for example, I think of Joe as this very sort of 80s synth sort of sound, and
Right.
then you
Yeah.
get Cam, you get like the punk. And so,
Yeah.
but that song really feels like it matches perfectly for the energy of what they're trying to do.
Hmm.
So yeah, what a fun pick that you had there.
Yeah, it was funny because like, that was my second episode ever on, and the first one was 106, which was Landfall. And, like I guess you start a show that's been started already, and you want to like make sure that your style sort of like blends with the style of the show. You're always bringing your own thing to the table too. But I think it was with 109 where I was just like, you know what, like I working with the Chris's and Jonathan was just so easygoing, and they're so collaborative and so generous. They're like, I was just like, I'm gonna just start doing what I want to do, and that, I guess that was one of the reasons I tried to put those songs in there. But
That's perfect. Well, I want to mention something from New Coke from episode 2 of
mm,
season 2, and I don't know how much you'll have to say about this, but I think the scene was so fun. We get a scene where Gordon has decided to strike out on his own, and he's gonna start his own business out of his garage, and
mm,
he's bought all this equipment and all this stuff. And we're coming off of a Cameron scene, and all of a sudden you hear, for me it was confusing because it was like engines revving, and like
it's like, is this
I was
music?
like, what's
Yeah.
happening? I was like, what am I missing on screen here? And so I was just like, I remember my attention just got totally focused. And then we get Gordon lifting up the hatchback, and we see him starting to set up his garage, and he's got this smile on his face. And it was the first time I'd ever heard that song Close to the Edit by
Mhm,
Art of Noise. It's such a
mhm.
strange particular song, and it
Yeah.
has such an energy to it. And I don't know if is there anything about that scene that you remember when you were cutting it?
Yeah, well, first of all, another shout out to Thomas because that was in his playlist of things that might be used for the season. And it just seemed to fit like this sort of like mindset of Gordon. One thing that I did, and I think it might have been the first episode I've done it on Halt, was the super long pre-lap. Like I started that song so early at the end of the other scene, just because they had like this great strange intro. I might have cut the intro down by half, but still, it was like really long. I tend to do that a lot on halt shows, I think, where I have like a long pre-lap. I also tend to do very long post-laps into the next scene. Um, so I did that here. And I also like I just remember just finding it just had really good rhythms I could play with, like doing like fast cuts then long things. Like for example, like Gordon plugging in the cables into the monitors where it's like three quick jump cuts to the beat, and then like holding long as we pull out and dolly and reveal the entire his whole two computer setup. It wasn't that big, I suppose. Um, it's just two. But
Yeah, now that you mention it, it
yeah, I
was
know,
quite a
right? Like,
production.
whoa, two computers. But remember, it wasn't it that same episode where he's like, I have two phone lines now. I think
Yeah.
that's the episode. But
It's
and one
how quickly we forget how big a deal that stuff was.
I know, right?
Like,
But I think one nice little flourish too was I sort of timed Gordon snapping his fingers to the end of the song beat, which obviously, he was just snapping his fingers, and I just like, hey, if I slide it like this, it'll look like he's actually snapping to the end of the song. So
something about it, I mean, it must have been the perfect buildup, right? Because the moment he's done all this stuff to set up his two monitors, and then like it's all there, and then he just takes a moment and he just sort of moves one like a quarter of an inch.
I know.
And something about that, the way the whole thing was set up, makes me laugh out loud. Like,
Yeah.
just that little final touch in the middle of this strange song. What a fun what a fun scene, what fun energy there was to that. um but let's talk a little bit about, so season 3, episode 7, a very different scene. I mean, couldn't be, to me it doesn't feel like it could be more opposite to the one we just talked about. But to set this up for people who haven't rewatched it recently, so this is from The Threshold. So this is an episode where Joe's been ousted from his company. Ryan's dealing with fallout. Ryan makes a very big bad choice that will be the downfall of that character. But in the meanwhile, Donna and Cameron have had conflicts about how to run their company for basically forever. And it's coming to a head here. And the question has been put on the table: to IPO or to not IPO. And Donna wants to go for it. Cameron does too, but not right away. She wants to have a little bit more time to work on some things to get Mutiny up to speed before they go for the IPO. And in effect, that's polar opposite views. So we get to, towards the end of the episode, we get to a rather long board meeting with all of the stakeholders at Mutiny. And it's a big deal scene. It's extremely tense. In the end, Cameron's not going to be working for Mutiny anymore. And, I watched it back for this, and even just the clip, just like, it's like anxiety just watching it.
Mhm.
What do you do with a scene like this to make this come off the way that it does?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because like Halt tends to do sometimes like special camera angles, right? You have the Dutch angles, you have like a lot of use of negative space with the character smushed against like the frame or something, the edge of the frame. Karin Kusama, the director, didn't do that stuff in this scene in particular. I think I don't want to speak for her, and we actually never spoke about this, but like I sort of suspect it was like this scene is about the writing and the performance, and we don't need anything else. Um, that's how I felt about cutting it for one. Like I mean, I don't even think I put any music in until Cameron slams the door. And even then, like for my temp, I just put in like a small drone that sort of just keeps creating like a slight tension that was already there, so you're not like leading the audience, like it's already been there, so you're just sort of like enhancing it. And then Paul sort of seemed to like do something very similar to that, like I think he agreed like we don't need much there. um in terms of like the patterns I would use to cut it, it's sort of like just the footage just sort of told me what to do based on the performances, but like I did tend to start wider at first in this one, like medium wides as they're coming in. It's like no big deal, they're just coming in for this little quick chat, right? Know what's gonna happen. And as Cameron starts to speak, I remember I used the wide shot, which is like at the end of the table facing everyone, and the camera slowly booms down. And I held on that for quite a while. I think it was also like, it was kind of like for me the calm before the storm. And then once we get into it, then I kind of went to all the coverage. Um, and obviously like cutting reactions where I saw fit. And also I think I took advantage of like if camera was going to be facing Donna, I would kind of use the angles past Donna to Cameron, or if she turned to Boz and Diane, I would like kind of switch there. So it kind of like could break it up if I wanted to. But that was really it. I mean, I think mostly the way I got it to be an effective scene on my end was through pacing. I tend to do overlaps, sorry, prelaps a lot. And it doesn't even have to be very noticeable. Like I might do imperceptible prelapse, like a syllable, but it sort of just keeps the momentum going, and it's kind of like like propels you from line to line. And I did this even before like the tension starts. I just do it all the time, but I think like it sort of gives this sort of like unease to the whole dialogue that like something's happening and like we're just being propelled forward. And then once the conflict really happens, I think I overlapped more to make it look like they're cutting each other off, that sort of thing. But like for the most part, tried to stay out of the actors' ways because they were so good.
That is a good point. There is some there is a feeling of them cutting each other off. I think like you're right. You hold on Cameron in the beginning and she's sort of laying out her case. And I think you're sort of thinking, wow, she's come a long way. She's actually making an effective start to her argument here. But then she says one thing about waiting and Donna jumps in and you're right. Like there is this feeling of, oh, I'm letting her get too far in her argument. I have to jump in now. And
Mhm.
there's just no room to breathe in that scene. So I like this point about how you used a lot of this overlapping to make that even more noticeable.
Yeah. And one thing, I just remembered something, and I mean, I'm not sure if they blocked it this way on purpose, but one nice thing was that, when things get heated and Cameron slams the door, she's no longer at the head of the table, she's by the door, which meant that instead of using overs, like really past Donna to Cameron and past Cameron to Donna, there are more like clean singles, which also sort of makes it a little more confrontational, a little colder, so like kind of worked in that scene that way too.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so they feel more separate at that point.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
What a fascinating scene that is. And a very different scene that we want to talk about is the opening to 401. So it goes,
Mm.
which I was just watching that back, and what a winner that thing starts with. It's like, wow. And I don't it's like a magic trick actually. I don't know how that was accomplished. So I know you did a lot of work to support with that. Tell us about like what your experience was with that episode.
Yeah, it's funny because like it is like a wonder, right? So like I wish I could just say like I didn't do anything, like it was just all one shot. But it was what is I mean it's like it's basically the entire teaser is one long shot, but it's impossible to do that shot because as one because it's two different sets. At least two different sets that we had. We had like the upstairs of the company and the downstairs of the old mutiny building, and then we had eventually the forest. Um, so one nice thing is that I was actually with Juan, our director, when we shot that, and because I had shadowed him before for like a month in season two, like we kind of knew each other enough where he trusted me. And we did a lot of invisible edits in that scene. So he's done this before, like in his movie, he did this very long wonder that had invisible edits, kind of like Birdman style. Um, and he said, I never want to do just like a wipe past like a black, column or something and wipe there and get into the other scene because like audiences are too savvy for that now. Like they know that's where like, that's where they did the blend. So we would do various things like the very first shot, like we were like, the camera's moving over the table. We actually blended on the table because that was the upstairs set. And then we went to the downstairs set where there was we had a big hole in the ceiling and put another table there and continued to move on that table so we could then go down into the basement. It was like kind of like tricky stuff like that. And you just couldn't do that because it was literally two different sound stages. You couldn't just like, like why can't the camera just go from the upstairs to the downstairs? Even like following Gordon up and down the stairs, it's two different locations. So we always would have to like blend on some tricky way of doing that. And what was nice about being there was that uh, I was actually able to like watch the takes as we're shooting it, and I could say that the Juan like I don't think, like there's something technical that happened, like maybe like someone walked in a certain way at a different timing. And I'm like, I don't, because I was the one that's going to cut it together. And like, I can say like, that's not going to blend as well. And Juan would say, okay, let's do another take. And then, so that was amazing that he would let me say that. The other thing is that our post producer, Andrea Stilgenbauer, I don't know how she did it because like studios are so strict with security, but she arranged it so I could get the footage on set from the previous day. And so I could work in my hotel room or I could work on the set between setups. So I was actually cutting the wonder together as we were shooting it. So that way Juan could sort of see proof of concept too. So that's how we did that. It was just like, I mean, I shadowed Juan for two different seasons. It wasn't planned that I was going to cut there too, but it just worked out so well that he happened to be shooting that oneer where I could actually, maybe be of some use on set. And also I could be cutting it too to make sure that it was working.
I mean, it's incredible. I think for me, every season is amazing of this show for me. But season four, I even before I've gotten into season four in this rewatch where I'm going really in depth, I feel like, the artistry of this show levels up a notch. I mean, it's just from every department, camera angles, like everything is just and editing choices. Like it feels like a lot of work goes into just little moments,
Mhm.
where another show might not do that.
Mhm.
But to open it with that, and for me, it's like this looks like one shot, but how could it be? Like as somebody who doesn't know what's happening on the back end, it's like this is impossible. But I think that's sort of the feeling. It's a good feeling to have, I think, for watching the opening of that season.
Yeah, I mean, like Juan does crazy stuff, right? So I mean, he did the oneer at the beginning of season two. That was an in-camera oneer, and I was there for that too. Actually, I remember like they rehearsed it for like hours, because like they had to like figure out how are we going to choreograph this whole thing with the different, actors and all the crew people. But in the end of the day, I think we wrapped like 4 hours early because I mean, because he got it all in one. That was it. He was done.
Like, okay, time for lunch. That's amazing. Before we move on, was there anything else that you wanted to say about your experience with Juan?
With Juan.
Yeah.
Oh, he
Or
was
does that kind of cover it?
yeah, no, it was great. I mean, like, well, like I said, I went to shadow him first on season two, and because I started with episode two, which was New Coke, I was there for in Atlanta on set for the entirety of prep and the entirety of shooting. And Juan and the Chris's and Melissa just gave me full access to everything. Like I was there at every casting session. So I was there when all the different actors were auditioning to be the mutiny coders. And then as they all sort of like got narrowed down and they all were all brought in again for like a chemistry read. That was like Nick Pupo and Joshua Hoover and J. Elijah Cho. And it was just amazing to get to experience that. And yeah, in fact, I was talking to them on set later, and after that last audition, they didn't know they had it yet, but they suspected they did. And I think they all went to go bond, and like we all went to Pancake House, and they had a little celebratory lunch. But but like I got to witness all that. I was there at like every location scout, and it was amazing just to be there for that whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and then I got to mention this. This is like the most amazing thing. Like I can't believe this happened. I was in my little office that they gave me, between like production meetings and whatever before shooting started. And Melissa walked in and said, So, there's two wild lines that we need to get from Alana and Morgan, who play Haley and Joni. This for one line for episode one and one line for episode two. And she said, well, since like you'll be using these wild lines later, do you want to direct them? And I was like, what? I was like, sure. And then she made it even better. She said, and then why don't you just get a whole bunch of other stuff so that we can have a library of stuff that they'd be saying throughout the whole season? Because like if you're in like the Clark house and you have like, if you have Gordon and Donna speaking, it might be nice sometimes to pepper in a little bit of off-camera dialogue from the daughters, just to remember like they have daughters. This is not just about adults talking about computers, right? So that was the plan. And I was really excited. In fact, I went home to the hotel and I called my wife and I said, like, okay, can we figure out like what a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old girl would talk about, because I had to have all these ideas. And in fact, I still have the document. So I like printed it out because right? And like my wife and I were like came up with all these different things like playing dress up, like let's be princesses, or like I'll be the mommy, or like no, I want to be the mommy, like so they can argue and that sort of thing, or like maybe choreographing a dance together and like sort of like what they might talk about, like let's do this step and now we twirl and now we do this, or playing with like silly putty, like stretching it on the newspaper and that sort of thing. So like we just came up with all these various things. And then still, this is before shooting happened. So like I was all set and excited to do this. And then another day, back in this little office I was in, our line producer, Jeff Freilich, came in. And he came in and said, like, so I hear you're gonna direct the girls. And I was like, yeah, I'm really excited about it. But in my head, I'm like, oh no, he's gonna kill this idea. Like there's gonna be some reason why I'm not able to do this. And he paused for a while and he said, so like now you're not just shadowing, you're working. So I'm gonna figure out how to pay you a little bit for this. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, like, how generous is this? Like the fact that I was even given this opportunity and then I was actually gonna get a little money for it. So I thought that was amazing.
I am
So
hearing the best things about Jeff Freilich
Jeff
in these
Freilich,
interviews.
I've been on the the van to go to location scouts with him. So like I've been on the van with him for like 6 hours. He tells the best, most entertaining stories. It's like, oh my God, I've heard so many stories from Jeff. Um, so now it comes time to actually shooting this Wildlines. And so the way it was going to work is that we're at the Clark set, and there's going to be a scene with the two girls and with Carrie and Scoot. But the two girls weren't going to shoot too much; they just had less to do. But we'd have to wait for the entire scene to be done because we need our sound mixer and our boom operator and the second AD to like be like a mini crew so we can go over and record these wild lines. So when the girls were done, I got to like get introduced to them. They knew we were going to be doing this, but I sat on the floor and we just like got to know each other and I sort of discussed the ideas and they had some ideas and we just sort of like just like we just rehearsed them basically and just got to know each other. And what I didn't know was that at some point Melissa Bernstein came down and she was like observing me in the back, and I think that kind of gave her the reassurance that Rob's not going to mess this up. So then they wrapped that set, and when the camera crew started lighting the next set, I had access to our sound people, and we went and we recorded it, and it was super helpful. I mean, we used it throughout season two in various ways, so it was awesome. It was a great experience.
Oh, that's amazing. So much opportunity to try new things on that set.
Yeah, yeah, it was great.
Well, I know there's a scene each from a couple of your other season 4 episodes that we want to talk about, if that's okay. And they're big ones.
Hmm.
Uh, who needs a guy? Episode 7 of season 4.
Nothing
We've
happens.
talked about it a tiny bit to sort of set up for it, but Gordon, what really we should have known was coming for a long time. I think caught a lot of people by surprise, and Gordon passes away in this episode. So tell me about like what what were you working on with this episode, and how did you make this happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, like the way the Chris's wrote it, like amazing. Like what a subtle and creative way to show a death of a main character. And the way Trisha Brock, the director, the way she shot it with like the lens flares to like sort of like represent like this is not reality, and the way she like rack focused off of Gordon to the background, like for that final shot. Oh, that was just like, I mean, it just, I think that just brings tears to people's eyes. Um, I remember I cut the scene and I did something different. In fact, I mean, the way it works in on Halt, in most shows, a lot of times is that, you'll lock the episode and you're using temp music throughout your entire cut. In our case, I'm using temp music from seasons 1 through 3. For whatever reason, I just didn't want to use anything that we've ever used for this scene. I just felt like this is such a special scene. I thought it deserved something that's just completely different. And I wanted it to be there like now. Like I didn't want to wait. And I remember I called Paul Hassinger up, our composer, and I said, like, I know you're a busy guy, but if I send you the scene, is there anything that you can like make now for me? And I sent it to him. He said, yeah, and he gave me the scene that I don't think it changed. That cue was so beautiful. Um, I don't think it changed like one note from when he gave it to me to when we released the episode. But that was like a very different way of working, I think, so
Well, and I think when you send a scene like that to Paul, it's clear why this was so important. I think it's such a big moment, and what a haunting scene to have, and the
yeah.
music behind it is part of the reason for that. The sound cue is just it makes, I don't know, it makes me shudder to think about it. But it is interesting because it's like we were teased about it so much. And
Mhm.
when I'm hearing from people about the show, they're like, I still can't believe he it's like it was a surprise
Yeah.
that he passed away. It's like but on a rewatch, it's like this should not have been a surprise. It's like we've been teasing this forever. And what a tribute to everybody who worked on that episode, that it could catch us off guard the way that it does, and that it could feel so emotional and raw.
Yeah.
um
It's also so like it's so interesting that the Chris's like don't show the death really. Instead, it's more about how the death affects all the other characters later on. I think like just in the future episodes.
yeah, yeah,
So
it's
yeah.
beautifully done. One more scene that we wanted to talk about, and this is a really important one because it closes out the show. You
Hmm.
worked on that montage at the end of 10 of Swords, episode 410, and there's quite a lot going on there, and you have a big task of trying to close out an entire show on that. So, how do you approach something like that?
Yeah, that was interesting, especially because like Joe isn't even in the episode that much, right? He's at the beginning with the fortune teller and Carol Kane. And then if I'm not mistaken, he's not in the episode until the end, right? So I felt
It's a
like
lot of Donna and Cameron.
it's a lot of Donna and Cameron, yeah. And I felt like, it sort of it just makes it all more special when you finally get back to Joe and you feel like he's going to be maybe back at IBM because that's where, it's discussed that he went back there. Um, I think part of that was I cut the scene to two different pieces, and they were actually in the bin of like songs that Thomas provided. Um, and well, first of all, okay, so like the first what I did was I cut it together, and I don't normally do this, but I asked Andrea Stilchenbauer, our post producer I mentioned. I said, "Hey, do you want to see this the whole end? I'm gonna show it to you twice with two different songs." And she said, "Sure." So she saw it. When I played song number one, like she was crying, and I was like, "I think I have something here." But then I played her with the second song, which was Peter Gabriel's Salisbury Hill, and I recut the scene based on that one, right? And and keep in mind, like she's already seen it, so like her first impression's gone, right? But I played it again, and I think she was bawling. I mean, she was like really like it, like the crying was bigger, and I was like, "This is the one." And I think one of the reasons why that song is so effective is I mean, one, the song is great. But like I just wanted to hit certain key moments, like when we hit verse 2, I think it's when we pan across the credenza and we're showing like the giant, and then we're showing like Cameron at the Airstream on in the photo. And of course, we're going to show like, a photo of Haley and Gordon too, to make you more emotional. And then when we get to verse 3 is when I went like getting into the classroom. So I just sort of feel like the way the song builds too sort of like coincide with how I pieced the pieces of the montage together to just sort of time it to like climax to like the end when we cut the black. We also did something there that like it was I couldn't believe we were able to do this because I wanted to do this, but I heard like AMC's not going to let us do it, which is basically let the song continue on the credits because every single other episode in the series, with I think the exception of uh 407, Who Needs a Guy, we have score from Paul Hassinger over the credits. Who Needs a Guy, we had silence because Gordon just died. But what I think we weren't allowed to like have a song continue from the episode into the credits. But like, how could we not, right? Like the way especially the way I kind of maybe I forced their hand in a way because like the way I had it crescendo to cut the black. And then I just wanted like that feeling that you have to continue through the credits, right? You don't want to like stop it and go to another piece of music. So I did, and I don't know how it happened. I think it was like the Chris's and Melissa and Andrea basically just having lots of meetings about it, and basically like the AMC allowing us to do it.
Wow. Well, and it lets you, I mean, it's the last episode of the show. You want to have people linger on a feeling,
Right?
and
Yeah.
I think it absolutely does. For me, I linger on the feeling, it ends, and then I hit I restart the first episode again
Oh, dang.
because I don't
That's
want it to
commitment.
be
That's
over.
wow.
Uh, like how can I not have these characters in my world right now? Um,
Wow.
I mean, this was absolutely amazing to hear all of these stories. Is there anything that you're working on now? Anything else that you want us to know about, or any place we can find you to keep on top of what you're doing?
Oh, sure. Well, I do have a website, and it's just robertkomatsu.com. So that's easy. No spaces or anything. In fact, there is a contact me on there in case anyone, wants to contact me. I will see those messages. Um, in terms of what I've been doing, I think I mentioned those directors, Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, who I did Mrs. America with. We just finished the movie. It's called Freaky Tales, and it was the opening film at Sundance just a month ago.
Wow.
So, what it's about is four interconnected stories that take place in 1987 Oakland. And it has a lot of different elements like punk rockers versus Nazis, rap battles, film noir, martial arts, the Golden State Warriors, 80s sci-fi movie influences. So I'm still back in the 80s again. And our star is Pedro Pascal. So hopefully the movie will come out soon. It kind of made a big splash at Sundance, so we'll see what happens.
That's amazing. Well, I will have to look out for that. And,
Yeah.
congratulations on all of your success. And thank you for all the work that you did on this show. Um, and, anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
No, thank you for being such a fan. I mean, like, it's nice, like, I think like we didn't have it's like it was one of those shows where we didn't have like the biggest ratings, and then like all these articles would always come out like this is like the best show that no one ever watches, but still we had small ratings. In a way, it was kind of nice because I think it let the Chris's fly under the radar and they could do whatever they wanted, so like they could do the show they wanted as opposed to like what the ratings will make them do to like keep those ratings. And so it was a very special experience.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's nice to hear that as a fan of the show that you had that experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But, thank you so much for joining me. And to everybody who's watching this, keep watching Halt and Catch Fire.
Thank you.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.